Welcome to Strange Days, Here We Come. I'm your host, the pop mythologist. As you may be aware, the number of people in the US who are forgoing traditional housing and living in vehicles has been steadily rising. Whether it's a regular car, van, bus, trailer, RV, or some combination of the above. According to a report from the US Department of Housing and Urban Development, there are somewhere between 45,000 to 67,500 people living in vehicles. And that's from 2023, so the number has likely gone up since then, likely due to a combination of various socioeconomic factors. Of course, that's a lot of people, and even though their stories may share certain similarities, it's important to remember these are all unique individuals, and their stories will be different, and their reasons for living in vehicles will also be different. So with that as a bit of context, today I have with me two very special guests who have a remarkable story to tell that I think you'll find fascinating. They are my friends, Lauren and her husband, Noah. For reasons related to privacy, they prefer not to use their last names, and so I won't. And they're here to talk about a lot of things, but one of those things is how they took an old bus and converted it into a home after having lived in more conventional housing. And then they took their new home on wheels and embarked on a cross-country trip across the U.S., which started early this year and which is actually still going on. So they're joining me while they're still on the road. And because this is a podcast about examining dystopia and collapse through the lens of popular culture, we'll also talk a little bit about the 2020 movie NOMADLAND, written and directed by Chloe Zhao, based on the nonfiction book by Jessica Bruder. Not because the stories in the film and the book are the same as my friend's experience, but they are relevant in many ways and connected in some ways. And also, to be honest, I just needed that pop culture pretext because that's partly what this podcast is about, is pop culture. So, Lauren and Noah, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, so glad to be here.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for taking the time to join me because I know that when you're on the road, you're busy. And you're constantly dealing with things that come up, troubleshooting and things like that. So I really do appreciate it.
Yeah, we were happy to. And actually, just to provide like a fun little anecdote, I was actually nervous that we already canceled on you once because something came up. And then I was nervous because we're currently on some BLM land outside of Glacier National Park. So it's free public land that a lot of people camp on. But we have solar panels in our bus, and it has been cloudy for a few days. And we've had issues where if we have a few days without sun, sometimes the battery just dies at like 50%, which is not supposed to happen. And so I was nervous that we were going to lose our power source to be able to talk to you. And we were like, what are we going to do if that happens? And we were trying to find RV parks and stuff. But so far, there's been enough sun, and we made it.
It's been a pretty sunny day today. Not what the weather app said it was going to be, but it's been much appreciated. So
Yeah, see, that's what I mean. It's like things constantly come up. And then you're constantly having to improvise. I mean, Lauren, I guess it's good you have an improv background because this is like real improvising on the road. I'd like to start by just briefly telling the audience how we came to know each other.
Yep.
So both Lauren and Noah are my friends, but I met Lauren first. And I met her on an online community for futurists called Urgent Optimists. Or I should say rather, it's a community for foresight practitioners and students of foresight, to be more precise, because futurist can mean different things sometimes depending on the context. But anyway, this community was founded by the renowned futurist, author, and game designer Jane McGonigal, and was supported by the Institute for the Future, or IFTF. I first met Lauren there, and I can't remember who it was who first asked the question. And Lauren, I think it was because of something that either you or I posted maybe, but at one point, one of us asked the other, hey, are you by any chance collapse aware? Like, do you remember who asked who first?
I think it's possible. I had tried to write something about collapse in my little bio on the forum because I wanted to really make sure people knew, like, I'm not just here to talk about, like, solar saving the world. Like, I'm trying to talk about it as, you know, a tool in a collapsing world. So I think it's possible I had used the word collapse in my bio, and you found me that way.
Yeah, in fact, I remember being very struck by what you wrote in your profile bio. And if you'll bear with me, I'm going to paraphrase it by memory. Forgive me if I butcher it too
Well,
much, but
I don't remember what I wrote, so you're wrong.
okay.
We'll call it true.
Okay, but I think it was something along the lines of our system demands infinite growth, but I do not believe that it's either possible or desirable to have infinite growth. And I believe we are witnessing a slow breakdown of our systems. Some say this makes me a pessimist, but on the contrary, I am striving for hope and change and a better future. Like something like that. Am I right?
Yeah. I mean, that sounds about like something I would say. So yeah, for a paraphrased memory from a couple of years ago, that sounds like a great synopsis.
Yeah, thank you. And if I remember correctly, by that point, you had already taken the Foresight Essentials course at IFTF.
Yep.
And we had some cool conversations about how we both felt that foresight skills and collapse awareness can complement each other in some very useful ways. Because I do feel like it can be easy for people to latch on to certain limited preconceptions or assumptions about collapse.
Right.
And anyway, having met on Urgent Optimist, you then introduced me to the EcoGather community, or what used to be the EcoGather community, which I believe is now a new group called Otherwise. Is that correct?
Yep, you got it.
Okay. And then, of course, you introduced me to Noah. And then, Noah, I don't know if you felt the same way, but I felt like we hit it off right away.
Very much so. Yeah.
Okay, great. So, speaking of this term, collapse awareness, I wanted to ask you guys about what the term means for you, because in collapse-aware communities, there are often individual differences in how each person interprets both the concept of collapse itself and also what it means to be quote-unquote collapse-aware. So I just wanted to start by asking you what it means for you guys to be collapse-aware.
I want to hear Noah's answer first.
I don't think I've really grappled with this particular question before. I think for me personally, I think I went through a few phases of it. And so let me see if I can talk through my phases, and then let me see if I have a sort of guiding principle at the end. Okay, so I think what happened to me is I was in school, high school, college, and I was a real, as Lauren liked to call it, hoop jumper. Like in a circus, someone sets up a hoop and I jump through it. And so do good on a test. Oh yeah. Just trying to jump through the hoops that people put up for me, have a clear definition of success. And that was something I felt like I could really get behind. Came out of college, started thinking about just other things like, what is it all for? That sort of thing. How much oil is there? Are there practical limits to the sorts of things that as a society, it seems we're trying to do? Do we have enough electricity to do the things we want to do? Do we have enough oil to power the things we want to do? Are we in a direction where the amount of consumption that everyone is doing, does that seem sustainable? And for a while, I don't know, I just felt like I went through kind of a confused phase of how is this possible? Why is this not a bigger problem yet? Or is it going to come crashing down? Do people who are, making decisions about oil usage or something, are they considering this? What are they thinking about it? Are they just lying and saying, no, it's not going to be a problem? So there was a phase of confusion. And then probably a few other phases, but where I ended up now is I think I just feel, I don't know, I have this framing that I can use to help explain things I observe. And sometimes it's more helpful than other times. So the guiding principle here, to me, to be collapse aware would just mean that you would consider that our current society could be on its way downwards and use that as a way to explain something you observe in society. That's one of the framings you might use, or one of the perspectives you might take. Not that you have to use that framing for everything you see, not that that's the only framing you would use, but to be aware that that's an option.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I just want to maybe highlight a couple of important resources that I think were particularly interesting on Noah's journey there, which were, I think, Limits to Growth, that MIT paper.
Oh, yeah, that was good.
I think it's mentioned on the Breaking Down Collapse podcast with Corey and Kellen pretty early on. And I think Noah really liked the Limits to Growth paper because it used data and science and institutions that are usually considered trustworthy to say things may not be what they seem. And then I think Noah also just has read a ton of fiction that explores kind of apocalyptic concepts. And so in a lot of ways, I think fiction primed Noah for collapse a lot more than I was primed, because I haven't historically been as much of a fiction girl. So
yeah, so Limits to Growth is, I believe, we can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it was approximately 1970s, and it was a group of 6 or 8 or something MIT researchers who put together a paper called Limits to Growth. The PDF should just be like available for free online, but that's where I found my copy. And then they did an update about 30 years later in 2020. They like added like a preface and they adjusted some things. But in that paper, they just tried to explore some like hypothesis tests. Like, let's say that we continue consuming these various resources at the same rate that we are now. At what point do we run out of what things?
And what happens to the population?
And what would happen?
What happens to the pollution levels? Yeah.
Right. Exactly. And then they also say, like, let's say that actually we held some of these constant. Let's say that we completely stopped our consumption of a particular resource. Then what would happen? So they go through a few of these, and I thought it was very interesting. And yeah, like Lauren said, I'm a big fiction person, a big science fiction person, a big apocalyptic fiction person, and a big like, post-apocalyptic. That's actually more my thing rather than active apocalypse, but post, like after that, what happens? And then people kind of recall like, oh, what was the downfall of the previous society? So anyway, so for me, a lot of this just sounded about right. Like I was like, yeah, that sounds, I could see that because I've seen it many times in many of the books that I read.
You're a natural fit for this podcast.
I suppose so. Whereas I think for Lauren, some of it was like a little more like, whoa, like it was a different concept.
So I was very much in high school and college also a hoop jumper, but within the hoop jumping framework, I would like find things that really frustrated me, like it seems like things aren't quite right. Like in high school, I was already thinking this. Like, for instance, there were just like all these little things that kept coming up in school where I was like, clearly something's wrong with the education system. And if something's wrong with the education system, like no wonder we're seeing all these like kind of societal problems. I very much was like trying to be in on current events and understanding like cause and effect of those things. And so I set out on a mission to reform America's education system. And I started majoring in public policy in college to be able to do that, and took public policy education classes, etc. And kind of like got to this point where I was like, oh no, I have to pivot, because I started realizing that, first of all, a lot of metrics that we care about, like the black-white test gap, like if you're concerned about like racial disparities in schools, for instance, like one of the best things you can probably do policy-wise is just eliminate poverty. And so like education reform started feeling like a really conservative way to go about bringing about the world that we, like a better world. And then I started like looking for the next thing, and I had a run-in with effective altruism, where they were kind of trying to like prioritize the world's most important problems. And I actually got really into effective altruism for a while. And that's how I ended up taking my first job out of college, because they had talked about their mission was to improve the human condition by turning knowledge into practice. And I was really excited about this organization. And eventually I talked to people higher and higher up in the organization. And one of them told me, maybe the world's most critical problems are the ones that we're getting paid to work on. And that just was like incredibly disheartening. And it made me start to realize like, okay, maybe we had a chance before. Like I realized these are the kinds of people in positions of power. Like there's no way I'm going to be like high enough in influential organizations anytime soon. At the time I was probably like 26 or so. I'm far away from being able to like influence these giant organizations that have real power and resources and money. There's simply not time if these are the kinds of leaders that we're dealing with right now, for the baton to get passed to people like me who would try to really turn the ship around. And then one of my friends, Eric, who you know through otherwise, kind of brought up collapse and said, like, he's the one who introduced me to the Corey and Kellen podcast, actually. And then I was like, oh my gosh, this explains so much. I had spent all this time like going around trying to find the key problem, the root problem, the most important problem to help us rebuild, because clearly things were bad. And then to have the framework that instead said, like, actually, everything is crumbling. This happens in history, like empires fall. Have you heard of Rome? Like that sort of thing was like really a huge relief, because I was putting a lot of pressure on myself to like try to actually rebuild this stuff that seemed kind of impossible to rebuild. And now it's relieving to say, like, first of all, yeah, we probably can't rebuild it. But second of all, we probably don't want to rebuild it, because it turns out there's this whole myth of progress. So just like, I felt really betrayed, I think, by our society, that they had told me all these lies for so long. And now collapse awareness, I think, is just about facing reality. But there's so much hope and excitement for me within that, because I'm not in the mood to be doom and gloom about it. I think that there are still ways to create beauty and fun and whimsy and love and justice and joy and kinship. All these things are still totally possible, and in fact, like, vital for survival. So yeah, I hopefully that speaks to what it means to be collapse aware, but I also gave you a big backstory, so I hope that was okay.
Yeah, no, that's terrific. And we completely see eye to eye with the mindset of approaching collapse awareness, where, at least for us, we're not interested in lingering over doom and gloom. We want to focus on constructive action. So very good. We're going to talk about the epic journey you guys are on, both in terms of the larger, overarching life journey, but also the immediate literal journey that you're on. And of course, one of the stops you made was Southern California, which made it possible for us to hang out in person, which was awesome. And we talked about a lot of things, including your road trip. And it was one of those times when I wished that like microphones could suddenly appear right in front of us, because it was so compelling for me. And I knew that there'd be people out there who'd want to hear this stuff too. And so I said, let's have this conversation again. And so, of course, I invited you on the podcast. And then I also invited you to watch the film NOMADLAND, which is actually a film that I talked about. So speaking of breaking down collapse, when I was interviewed by Corey and Kellen on their podcast, and if anyone listening right now is interested, that was episode number 70. I talked about NOMADLAND a bit, and I wanted you guys to watch that movie because it's an interesting counterpoint, first of all, to the romanticization of, hashtag van life or hashtag RV life that we sometimes see on social media. But there are other sides, and it's a complex thing. And also, I just thought it'd be interesting to kind of compare and contrast some of the similarities, but also the differences in experience. Before we get to the movie, let me first ask you a couple more very basic questions. The first one is, what were the reasons that you decided to transition from conventional housing and buy this bus and spend like months or years or whatever it was fixing it up to become your new home?
I have just a couple of very short things to say in response to that. One, we didn't know what we were getting into. That's maybe one reason. Another reason, a more motivating reason, is that we kept telling each other, we're not renting anymore. So we were tired of renting places, but at the same time, we didn't know where we wanted to live, to like buy a house. And also, mortgages are not something that we were in the mood for at the time. We weren't ready to commit that much to making that much money per month for every month for
30 years.
Yeah. Or else, that sort of thing didn't feel like what we wanted to do, but at the same time, we didn't want to keep renting. And so we were really looking at alternatives, but we didn't know really what we were getting into also. So I think that was a key factor. Like in hindsight, if we knew, I don't know if we would have.
It would have been more of a conversation.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think to add a couple things there, I think an interesting part of the bus story for me is that when we first decided to do it, I don't think I was collapse aware, and I became collapse aware like throughout the process. And so my reasons for wanting to do it really shifted. And there were even moments where it felt like I was kind of reverse engineering justifications for doing the bus, where it was sort of like, okay, well, let's say, so I'm collapse aware, like what are all the reasons that a collapse aware person would do a bus? Because there's like, definitely, and when we talk about Nomadland, we'll definitely talk about how like living in vehicles is absolutely a response you can have to collapse, and like being nomadic in this way is a way to survive America, absolutely. And then at the same time, I struggle with like this tension between, I'm so glad I'm getting a chance to say this because it's been like on my mind. There's like this tension for me about living in buses and vans and stuff like this, where it's, on the one hand, the nomadic life is something that I think has been around for a long time. Like, it seems like plenty of pre-colonial cultures did move around, and like permanent settlements were way less of a thing back before colonialization. And so there's like totally this like ancestral basic drive, I guess, with humans where it makes sense to move around. Maybe with the seasons where like, you know, food is going to be available in this area during the winter, but not up here. And at the same time as like the nomadic lifestyle being very like tied to human history, within that, there's also this tension of like, yeah, but we're like burning a bunch of fossil fuels to do it this way. Like, we're fully getting like around 12 miles a gallon on a good day in the bus, burning diesel fuel, contributing to all the chaos and destruction around us. And that feels bad too. And at the same time, we're not even being nomadic in a way to like follow the seasons and eat food and farm and forage. You know, it's very much like we go buy groceries from this conventional grocery store, and I'm not building meaningful relationships with place in the way that we're doing it. We're kind of just bopping around and visiting places. And so anyway, I have this tension between like the survival aspect and also living my values around being more connected to the land and getting in touch with like the human animal that I am and reintegrating with ecosystems. So yeah, the bus has presented some internal wrestling for me. And yeah, but I agree with Noah fully. Like, we were trying to decide where we wanted to live. We had been living in Colorado. We knew that wasn't home for us. And the bus presented a way to kind of see some different places while we were deciding, while also not having to rent anymore. And even now, like, we're talking about next, what do we want to do once we get back? And living in the bus for a while is still part of the plan, especially if we can find a little patch of land to put the bus on so we don't have to move so much. But I think a 30-year mortgage is still not something I'm interested in, and it feels too scary, especially after Hurricane Helene just hit Asheville and a bunch of people like lost their houses completely, like mortgages down the drain kind of energy. And it just feels, yeah, like really scary to tie up so much wealth and tie up so much of yourself into a house that could go away for any number of reasons and collapse. You have to leave because a forest fire or flood or scary violence or any number of things could make you have to leave your house, even if the value of the house has gone up over time, because that's how housing markets work, quote unquote. So
Yeah, no, very good. I thought of a whole bunch of things while you were talking, and this is jumping ahead a bit, but what you just said made me think of that scene in Nomadland when Fern, the protagonist, is at her sister's house,
yeah.
and her brother-in-law and some of his friends, they're in real estate, and they're all like, oh, and this is like after the 2008 housing crash, and so they're like, it's a few years after that, presumably, and they're like, oh, you know, the prices are going up again, things are looking good. I wish we could have bought a bunch of property when the prices crashed, and so now we could sell it and make a fortune. And then Fern's like, sorry, I gotta just cut in here and say, I think it's messed up how you guys encourage people to throw their life savings into a house. Yeah. And so not only then do they end up in lifelong debt, they often end up losing everything, as she did. And that just made me think of that scene. But
Yeah.
also, the system, like something else you said, like regarding the internal tension you've been feeling and the way the system pressures and sometimes arguably forces people to live and grapple with certain contradictions or tensions within themselves. But they kind of often have to survive.
Yeah.
And so it's a serious conundrum there. But I'm going to backtrack a little bit because you also mentioned Helene, and that was literally a question that I was really wanting to ask. So, regarding the awful flooding last year that hit the southeastern region of the U.S. and where you guys are in Appalachia, depending on your preferred pronunciation. And I know your community was hit pretty hard, and certainly many people in the region were hit very hard, even harder. But you guys were hit the hardest among people that I personally knew. And when disasters like that occur, many people who own homes, as you said, either because they can't afford insurance or because insurance companies are pulling out of disaster-prone regions, they often end up losing everything. And I was wondering if witnessing what you did during that time reinforced your decision to not pursue the path of traditional home ownership. And also, did it add any new layers to your understanding of the importance of community resilience and solidarity?
There's so
So
much.
2 parts to the question.
Yeah. Something I just want to quickly say as sort of like a bridge between these two topics is I do want to pull out my little book here. This is a table that I want to talk about just briefly from the book, The Art of Frugal Hedonism. I don't have the author's names off the top of my head right now. But household debt as a this is US statistics, and the emphasis of the book is not to be like super data science heavy. It's much more about like this particular table is about sketching like a view of resource use, basically. So it's a different emphasis from collapse, but it is talking about here household debt as a proportion of annual household income. In the 1950s, it was around 50%. So household debt as a proportion of household income was around
In the U.S.
In the U.S. was around 50%. So people would buy houses, so if you have let's say $100,000 household income, you might be in debt $50,000. Which those are not 1950s figures, of course, but now imagining you have $100,000 household income, you would be in debt $200,000. And then thinking about like how loans work and how you wind up paying so much more for the house than, like interest is just bonkers. Anyway, Hurricane Helene.
Can I just add one thing to that? So whenever we look at these like loan tables, I get really frustrated that they don't seem to like to tell you the actual amount that you're paying over the lifetime of it. They really like to talk about these like per month numbers. But I always have to add my own column to these tables that is like the actual amount that you're paying. So you want to buy like a $300,000 house. That's actually going to be $700,000 if you do it via this loan system, which, I mean, you can say like, it's a service that this bank is providing you because you don't currently have maybe $300,000 to just pay for it. And so you are paying for the service of not having that money right now. But you're paying $400,000 for the service of not currently having $300,000. So so I think that's an interesting thing to look at, but it has made me a lot more wary of wanting to pay for that service if there are ways that I wouldn't have to, because that's just pretty hefty.
Yeah. So to Helene, though, and it's funny because we were actually talking about buying a house like as Helene was happening. We were like, do we want to it was a circumstantial thing like within the family, like it had come up as a potential opportunity. And we were like trying to work this out as Helene was happening. So it's kind of like a funny like home ownership in the context of all this. Noah, do you want to riff on like, did Helene reinforce the bus decision for you, or how did it shift your picture of the bus decision?
I would say that it very strongly reinforced the know when your neighbors is important part of that question. Very strongly. I mean, people got to know each other that had driven by each other's houses for years and never really talked, and everybody was talking, everybody was helping each other out, everybody was it was I don't know if small group dynamics is a term that exists outside of like my small circle of people through which I have small group dynamics, but it very much created small group dynamics. There were small groups of people, you know, every neighborhood, every road was like their own thing, and everyone was trying to work together, but everyone was also looking after their own people. And so it was really interesting. It definitely enforced my like wanting to like get to know the people physically around me. It also made me talk to a lot of people that I wouldn't have talked to otherwise in rural North Carolina. And I think just the more I do that, just the more everybody's really, well, to use another couple phrases, everyone's the hero of their own story for sure. And then also everyone's, you know, really not so bad. Like there's not that many people out there that are like trying to be bad people. Everybody's trying to be a good person in the ways that make sense for them in their own context. So that's what I felt community-wise from Hurricane Helene. As to whether it reinforced the bus, I don't know. If we had a house that made it through, it didn't get flooded, that would have felt nice. If we had a house that did get flooded, that would be worse than having the bus. I don't. But
Wait, talk about the solar panel stuff.
Oh, that was pretty cool, actually. So nobody has solar panels in Western North Carolina. There are some, actually. This is a little bit
People totally
funny.
have solar panels, but yeah.
Okay, yeah. People in our particular small group did not have solar panels. Our particular neighborhood, the road, the little gulch we live on.
A holler, as they call it in Appalachia.
Yep. So up that holler, nobody had solar panels. There are solar panels if you drive in 20 minutes away. There's some guy who has like hundreds of solar panels in his yard off US 19. It's a little funny. Anyways, you could just always see it. You're like,
what's he doing with all that?
With all those solar panels? They're like all different shapes and sizes. Like they're not like one consistent array. It's just lots of solar panels. Anyways, we had solar panels on our bus when the hurricane happened.
We had just put the solar panels like on.
Just got them on. They were not hooked up to, so the solar panels, they had power going in through some kind of charge controller into our battery. And then they were going, that was it. That was it. So there was no way, we didn't have a way to plug anything into it. No outlets. No outlets. It just like charged the battery, kept the battery charged. Great. That's where we were then the hurricane happened. And so we had these solar panels on the top. But then we had no power, and we ended up not having power for
3 weeks.
3 weeks. Yeah, no power for 3 weeks. No grid power for 3 weeks, but we did have this battery, although we couldn't get power out of it, and we didn't know much about electricity at the time.
And we didn't have internet.
Didn't have internet to look things up, which made me really grateful for any printed manuals I had, which was nice. So what we did was during this hurricane, we dug around in all the manuals that we were able to find on this this equipment that we had. We talked to Lauren's grandpa, who was walking distance away and who had been an electrician. And so he gave us some spare parts. He was very preoccupied with many other things, as you can imagine, while this is happening. But he did give us some recommendations and some spare parts so that we were able to wire up.
And we also had a neighbor who happened to have Starlink that he was running off of his truck battery.
Yeah.
And he had it only running for like certain hours of the day, but we could go use his Starlink access to be able to like look up questions that weren't in the manuals. And that's how Noah was able to like kind of head chef this big project.
Right. And so we hooked up our very first outlet. It didn't look very pretty.
No, it was very sketchy.
Yep. But it did allow me to work because this was kind of interesting. Okay, so we didn't have power. It's you're getting a lot of details. You can keep how many of these you want. But you're going to get them.
And so, like, a lot of people, when this happened, had to, like, relocate. And, like, we had, like, neighbors who had to, like, leave the holiday. They had been, in the immediate aftermath, most people were able to just, like, if they had remote jobs, like, sorry, I can't work, that we just had a hurricane. And a lot of people were, like, literally, like, helping, you know, clear roads and dig us out of like landslides. Like there were very concrete active things that had to be done, but once those immediate things were done and it was just like sloshing through the rest of the chaos, a lot of people had to like leave the area to be able to keep their job, their like remote jobs. And we both had remote jobs at the time. And yeah, so this solution allowed us to be able to keep our jobs. So yeah, in that way it did reinforce the bus thing, and like seeing all the horrible stuff of people losing lots of I mean, first of all, we have so far kind of glossed over the fact that people lost lives, and a lot of animals lost lives, and a lot of ecosystems got really, pollution everywhere. It was a lot of destruction that I don't want to sort of gloss over. Our experience was a lot less intense than that. But obviously, if you talk to other people with the more intense versions of the experience, it's a totally different story.
Yes, definitely.
But our experience kind of was mostly a little bit fun being resourceful. And I think it was actually really helpful during Helene, not only to have this bus as sort of a way that we were already thinking about living life more unconventionally in a time of endings, but I think having the collapse awareness in general was helpful for getting through the hurricane, because I watched so many people just really, really struggle with the emotional, intellectual, spiritual resilience there, because they were wait a second, I thought I was living a safe, happy, normal life. And if they didn't have that, our cat just sneezed, so sorry if you can hear that. I think it was really jarring and distressing and world turning upside down kind of thing for a lot of people. And collapse awareness was a really helpful thing there. And Daniel, you and I have talked about also the foresight and foresight and thinking about the future and really imagining that sort of thing in really clear ways is a helpful way to build that mental resilience as well. So collapse awareness and having already thought through what would it be like to be in a really chaotic situation, both of those things were really helpful. And then solidarity piece in the hurricane, I think I agree with what Noah said. It was really inspiring to have people who usually were not really talking to each other working together in very concrete ways. And I think when survival is on the line, people set a lot of differences aside. And it, I think, kind of inspired me. I have such a hard time in the kind of very left-right divided dialogues that so much of mainstream culture gets into.
Same.
It can feel no, but we're missing the point here.
Exactly.
And I think it was sort of an even bigger driver for me to try to really find humanity in the people who usually are harder for me to communicate with. For instance, that really inspired Noah and I don't think it was a direct cause and effect, but it did plant even more urgent seeds to bloom in me to go try to we went to one of my grandpas is a square dance caller, and we had never gone to a square dance before. And truthfully, my relationship with that grandpa is not the most warm, rich relationship in my life. It's been kind of full of a lot of really just we don't talk that much. but we went to one of his square dances a little bit after the hurricane, and my grandpa's girlfriend, it was actually on his birthday, and I saw him light up like I have never seen him light up before. I was whoa, who is this person who's also my grandpa that I didn't know this side of him existed. And his girlfriend told me, and both of them are very hard for me usually to talk to and build bridges with, but she said there was nothing more meaningful you could have done for his birthday than coming to his dance. And it was just really exciting to have that concrete one little kind of nail in the structure of this bridge I'm trying to build with folks. So yeah, it definitely reinforced just having each other's back, even if you don't. It's the idea of community where you help the people and the beings who are around you, even if you don't like them that much. The point isn't that you are besties with everyone. The point is that you depend on each other.
That was beautiful. Thank you. And the story of the square dance is just yet another illustration of how beauty, joy, and meaning can exist even as it seems that things are falling apart around you. But so let's discuss the movie version of Nomadland for a bit. Not too much, because again, I do want to spend enough time talking about your experience, but we'll use it as an entry point. There'll be spoilers, of course. First, what were your overall impressions of the film? Like on the whole, did you like it? And did you feel like it spoke to any aspect of your experience so far in any way?
Yeah, so from my perspective, I felt like the movie did a lot of things really well. I thought it was compelling. I think what I wrote down after it is it made me feel things. I thought it was a good representation of a particular lens into what it might be like to live in this sort of way. Um, I think for me, I'm really going to try to not criticize anything too like strongly, mostly just to compare it to like my own experience, because I think that our experience is very different than the experience of the of Fern,
Fern.
right, in the film. I do think that the film focused a bit on like the melancholy aspect of it, which I think was made the film powerful in that sort of way. But I wouldn't want for someone to watch it and think that everyone who lives in a vehicle is as melancholy as it was portrayed in that film. Not that there's no one who's that melancholy, but not everyone. And like for me, so I have one specific example that I just want to bring up, which is there was a scene where Fern presumably was driving across the country. They might have even said she was in Colorado somewhere, and she was somewhere and she was floating down a river. She had taken all of her clothes off and she was just floating down like this like stream, like in the middle of the trees in a very like kind of serene space. And the music was sad. And like there was a melancholy scene which can certainly happen. But in my experience, if I'm living in a vehicle like I am now, and I don't really have a shower in here like I do now, and I come across a mountain stream that feels clean enough and secluded enough that I feel I could take all my clothes off and just float down it, that is a joyous occasion. And anyways, not to say that you couldn't also be sad while doing that, but I just felt like that was an example where perhaps if I were experiencing this, I would have done at least a little hooting and hollering. The water's cold. It's just a little something. Just a wider range of emotion. And again, like I think that the story they were telling in the film was not one that really they wanted to embody that, which is fine. But I think that there is a wide range of emotions that I experience in our journey on the bus, and I would expect that other people who are also living in vehicles experience a wide range of emotions as well.
And I like fully agree with everything Noah has said. I think like I liked the movie. It made me sad. I think it did a good job depicting like particularly like dystopian aspects of the United States, our economic system. I think it did a lot of things really, really, really well. There were plenty of parts that didn't feel super relatable to me, and I did a lot of comparing and contrasting just because it was not an apples to apples comparison, but enough of a comparison that it was just like an easy experience for me to go, oh, I relate to that, I don't relate to that. And I remember, like, to me, one of the parts where I think Fern was, like, laughing the hardest and seemed to be having, like, the most active in the moment joy was, like, they were at some sort of, like, aquarium type place, and the alligator, or it could have been a crocodile, I'm not good at telling those two creatures apart. Anyway, the alligator like kind of snapped and kind of spooked them, and I remember her kind of like cackling, and I'm really glad that they captured some like joy and happiness too. I think the places that she was finding joy and happiness were extremely different from the places I would be finding joy and happiness. I think if I saw an alligator in captivity, I would be really stressed out. But it was a great time for that group of people who were doing it. And there are also like shots of her taking a shower where it just seemed also melancholy, like Noah described the river scene, which I agree. We're like, when we jump in rivers, we're happy. And it's same thing with the shower. Like, it's so funny to like the things that become luxuries when you're living more simply is it just like it's totally like a huge reframe. And so her being in the shower and it kind of like still a melancholy scene, it was like weird to me because when I get in the shower now, I'm like, Oh yeah, like it just like I'm like visibly like I'm like scrubbing my hair so happy, especially if the campground that we're at doesn't have like quarter based system, because a lot of the times you have to like put in quarters and it'll give you like 3 minutes of a shower, and then if you want more time you have to put in more quarters, which is, it just like is so transactional when you're like, can I just take a shower? So if there's just like a free shower, like, wow, what a huge luxury. And I get like really happy, and like, it's probably a bit of like a funny, if there was a fly on the wall, it would probably be a little bit funny to watch me take a shower because I'm having such a good time in there.
So I definitely agree. I did want to maybe just talk about something that I think that they show Fern doing in the movie that we don't do a good job of, which is community building.
Yeah.
So in that film, you have these characters who they stay at one campground, they go to one sort of like meetup event, and then they see each other later across the country, and then they see each other again. And it's possible we're just doing it wrong, but that's not been our experience. I would like that to be more of our experience than it is. But I don't think we've seen the same people twice. Every once in a while, maybe on the highway, we're like, do we recognize that car? But certainly not at like another campground. We don't do a particularly good job of like making friends with the people in the areas that we do camp.
Like right now we're on Symbiolum land.
And there's maybe like 6 or 7 different people sort of throughout this area. And a lot of them have been here a long time. They've got kids that go around. It's nice. But we do like all our cooking inside. I feel like it's possible. People do 2 things outside that I've seen. They will either set up TVs outside and they'll watch outdoor TVs in which other people can come join if you're like watching a sports game. I've seen that happen. And then also people cook outside. That's definitely the bigger one. They'll set up their stoves and then they'll cook outside and they'll eat outside, and then it becomes a bit more of a community thing. We really don't do that. We've got all our cooking stuff inside, and we don't have any tables that are particularly easy to set up outside, so we don't really go out there for that. And so, I don't know. It feels weird to approach other people when they're like at their space. You're like, I don't know.
I mean, like all of this starts making me think about the concept of home. And I think that's another way that Noah and I are different from Fern, is like Fern really lost. She specifically says, I'm not homeless, I am houseless. Like that's a line from the film. And so the van and the road and that community became her home, but very actively, like the company town she lived in didn't exist anymore. The job she had didn't exist anymore. Her husband died. Like all of these things that used to be home for her were different. And so she was kind of seeking a new home. And I think that's, for me at least, a really big difference from like Fern's experience, and I think contributes maybe to why we do not as good of a job community building on the road, is that for me like the thing we're doing right now is not intended as a substitute for home or like a way of rebuilding home. The bus does feel like home to me at this point, and people have very kindly offered like, hey, if you want a break from the bus, you're welcome to come like sleep in my house. And that's really nice of them to say. But for me, like our bus feels kind of luxurious, and like packing a little overnight bag to go in to stay into someone's house like just doesn't feel like the bus is home, like there's no reason to be like leaving home if I have home with me. But with that said, we mostly just see each other 24/7 and our cat Indy, who lives with us on the bus. And then other than that, like any social interaction is if we happen to be visiting someone where they live, like when we saw you, or when we do like digital communication with people. And I think for me, sometimes when I do the like chatting with people at campgrounds, which we do some of that, to me it can feel almost isolating because it's not the deep, rich relationships that I am planning to go back to, like in Western North Carolina. And it feels like there is a community there waiting for me when I get back, at least for now. Something wild could happen and that eventually could, not be the case anymore. But right now, home exists in a community. We're just not there.
Yeah, and I think really for me it's less that like I need deep rich conversation with the people like that were physically nearby, but it's that so far just not really found any had any conversations that felt uh it feels like we're just interested in very different things. And so that just becomes rather tough.
Like, it's the kind of conversation I would be more than happy to have with a neighbor who I was going to see over and over again. Because you want to have a relationship with your neighbors, even if the conversations aren't thrilling. The same thing I was saying, where you look out for your neighbors in like a Hurricane Helene kind of situation. Like, you look out for your neighbors, even if you don't particularly like them and you aren't best friends with them, it's still worth having a relationship with them. Whereas here, like, the pouring the emotional energy into people I'm never going to see again probably feels hard.
Yeah. So, yeah, you guys touched upon a few things there that I'd also like to riff on for a bit. So, regarding the issue of like community, I think one reason, so like in the film and in the book, I think one of the reasons why the community seems a bit more consistent and the way they keep meeting each other again is they're a bit more organized. It's, I think, largely through the efforts of a guy named Bob in the movie, who's actually a real guy. He's a real person. He's like a YouTube influencer. He has a channel called Cheap RV Living. And I
I've seen
think
some of his videos. That's crazy. Well,
he and, the community, I think they make kind of an effort to be somewhat semi-organized. And they're also kind of largely all in similar boats in the sense of why they're living that lifestyle. Whereas I think when you guys come across people who are also on the road or maybe maybe temporarily living in their vehicles, some of them might be recreational travelers. Some of them might be like luxury RVers. And I think there's a very different sensibility there. Which is why it might feel like beyond casual small talk, which is of course fine, it might feel harder to connect. So I think that's one reason. And then you make a really great point regarding the melancholy that's kind of pervasive in the film. And my take on that, and this is because I've seen the film 3 times now, and each time I see it, I pick up on new stuff. But there's a really strong contrast between when Fern seems melancholy and lonely and when she seems really happy. And if you'll notice, like if you go back, watch it again, all the scenes when she seems the happiest is when she's in community. Yeah. It's like so noticeable, like especially when she's in not the RV, the Nomad community with Bob and her other friends. Like she seems the happiest. She's joking around. She's laughing. She seems very like extroverted. And then when she's alone, and it's partly just because maybe she's not interacting, but yeah, she looks noticeably melancholy. She's often spending holidays alone in Christmas, New Year's, just kind of like wearing her hat by herself, the little Happy New Year hat. It just looks so sad, right? Yeah. And I think the film is trying to sort of make that contrast of this lifestyle that many people are forced into, or maybe they partially choose, but it's not really a choice. Like, it's intrinsically lonely, and that's part of the tragedy of it. It's not really conducive towards building community for all kinds of obvious reasons, because I have to keep going to the next sort of temporary seasonal job, right? So there's an intrinsic loneliness to it, and that's the tragedy. And that's why communities like Bob's community is like those people actively trying to make an effort to remedy that. And actually, what's interesting is Fern's actually a really tragic figure, because despite how the movie makes it clear that she's the happiest when she's with people, and then she visits like one of her friends, right, who at one point kind of settles down because his son has a baby. But she's visiting her friend, and they're sitting around the Thanksgiving table. And again, it looks really meaningful. And he actually invites her to stay, like, indefinitely. And you can tell that part of her wants to stay. But despite that, she packs up and leaves again. And for me, that felt like she's having trouble moving on to new things because she's clinging to her husband. Like, she's still grieving the loss of her husband and can't let go. And for me, that was symbolic of a collective grief of so many Americans nowadays who are essentially grieving the loss of the American dream. And they can't explore other alternatives or other visions of life or the future because they're grieving that loss of this dream that was told to them was within their reach. So her loneliness was, I feel like, reflective of a lot of things. And so I think that's kind of why the film really stresses that. It's to stress the importance of community and the tragedy of when these people can't really tap into community just by virtue of their situation. Anyway, that was just one little thing. And then the animal thing. Like, so I don't know if you guys noticed, and even I didn't notice it until the third time I watched it, but there are numerous like lost or imprisoned animals in this film. Like there's that one dog that Fern finds that's been abandoned.
Yeah.
And then there's this thing with the crocodile, Lauren, that you mentioned.
Yeah.
And then there's this moment when Fern's in her car with her radio on, and the news announcer says, quote, "The bears held at the polar bear holding facility are troublemakers who are kept imprisoned until they settle down," end quote. So I didn't even notice that until the third time I watched this. And then I was like, whoa, wait a minute. Let me rewind that and get the exact quote, because that is definitely symbolic. Like, I think settle down in this context means not necessarily living in one place, but conforming. And on that note, like, have you guys ever run into anyone, like normies, you might call them, who sort of imply, like, can't you just like live a normal, quote unquote, normal life? Like maybe, you know, like well-meaning but tone-deaf relatives perhaps, or friends even. Just anything like that. Have you ever gotten that?
I think, yeah, to some extent of like, what, so you're just gonna live in a bus now? But not my, the kind of person I am has always been someone who's doing things pretty differently. And I think this is sort of like just a very loud version of kind of like making a choice that's unusual. I think a lot of the people I hold close are supportive even if they don't fully understand. Yeah. And I think, but I also think that's because we look enough like people who are kind of doing hashtag van life, where it's like a temporary do it while you're young. Like lots of people who are super supportive will be like, yeah, do it while you're young, you know, that sort of thing, where like, why wait until you can be a retired RVer to do this thing that you want to do? But they might not hold up that support. Like, I wonder if the support will start to fade if we keep living in the bus for longer. Like, we've only, you know, it looks like a short-term fun thing right now to people from the outside, but I could foresee it getting a different tone over time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What do you think, Noah?
I think that my family and my friends have been very supportive. I think that a lot of them, I agree with Warren. I think they view it, and I think we also, to an extent, view it as somewhat of a temporary thing, which makes it different. I mean, we're still not trying to like just buy a house and be in debt. So it's really not that temporary. But at least for this this particular trip, you know, it is, and we've tried to keep our, you know, sort of same jobs while doing it. I think that if we just quit everything and said we're just gonna
do a fun trip,
do a fun trip, and we've got no plan for afterwards, I think that any relatives that might be like concerned about that, I think that they're just not. They would be concerned if they felt like it was leading to a place in which we would be spending more money than we were able to have, and leading to a place of just, you know, what are you going to do there?
Yeah, and on the like, it feels temporary in some way. Like, I personally don't know that living on the road is really like my calling. If there's a way to do it another way, I would prefer that. I know that some people, it feels like their only real option. But as I kind of alluded to earlier in the conversation, and as I've shared with you when we were meeting in person, I think like a current vision that I have is that we'll be able to maybe get a small patch of land in Western North Carolina close to friends and family, and then build a luxurious outhouse on the land so we can have like a toilet where we can do that sort of thing outside of the bus. I think we would keep this toilet for number one in the middle of the night, but for anything heavy dutier, you can go into the outhouse for that. And then I would also love to have a bathtub in the outhouse so that I can take not only showers, but baths if I wanted to. That would be so wild. But we stayed in the bus like in Fort Collins, Colorado for a while, like a whole month visiting friends. And we found that living near cities in the bus was a lot harder than living in more rural areas. Just because you are kind of trying to do city things where you're like in public spaces with a lot of people and you're like not able to shower super often and you're trying to blend in a more long-term, like we were there for a whole month and it was just hard to blend in, or maybe even longer than a month. We were there a long time in Fort Collins, and trying to do like the city things while living in a bus was like very incompatible, it felt like, with city culture. So that was a really interesting thing, and is part of why I think having a luxurious outhouse would be part of my dream for a longer term way to stay out of debt but still have a house.
Well, speaking of outhouses, there's that one scene in Nomadland where one of the nomads says, the thing about living in your vehicle is that you have to literally deal with your own shit.
Yeah.
So let's talk about poop for a second. Or we don't have to talk. If you don't want to talk about it, we don't have to. But the reason I think it's interesting to talk about it a little is that's a real thing. Like,
Yeah.
you know, many modern people have the luxury of being able to not think about it because you just like, you know, you have modern toilets, you just flush it away. But in many situations, it's major. It's a major consideration. And so if you're willing, or to the degree you're willing, is there anything you want to share about like the challenges involved with that?
I built a composting toilet in this bus. It consists of 2 buckets. So the way this works, I'll even like just give you some details, because people on YouTube like don't fully show you their setup, because it's like occasionally you have to kind of dig deep though to find people who will like actually show you the buckets, because it just feels extremely vulnerable. I think for the first time ever I showed some distant relatives of Noah's who were kind of like, I don't know how old they are, grandparent age. They came onto our bus and they were the first people I ever like showed the buckets, because they just seemed like they didn't understand what I was saying or talking about, but they were curious and they were too polite to ask. But I was like, I'm gonna open the toilet seat now and show you. But it was like, I don't know what people want. So anyway, we've got a Lowe's bucket, like one of those 5-gallon Lowe's buckets in the back. That's for number 2. And we have a canning funnel that I ordered online that kind of is like a wide top and funnels down into a pretty skinny bottom. And that goes into, we have a, like, you can buy 1-gallon white vinegar jugs. That's what we use. And that way when we use vinegar a lot for cleaning and cooking and whatever. So when we have a new vinegar bottle, we can trade out the pee jug so that it, because it gets stinky over time. So there's pee, you pee into the funnel and you poop into the bucket, which we have ours double lined with trash bags. That's a thing that I feel bad about, is like all the plastic that we use in this way. In my dream luxury outhouse, it would also be a composting toilet, but there would actually be composting, like it would actually compost. And that way you just have like fertilizer for fruit trees when you're done, instead of bags of poop that you have to deal with. So we have bags of poop right now that we deal with, and it's poop layered with sawdust over time, which makes it really, the poop doesn't usually smell bad. And a hack that we found is we have a tiny little trash can in here, you know, those little, like in the bathroom, like people have the little pedal operated lid on the trash can. We have one of those also where we put toilet paper, because we found when we were putting the toilet paper in the 5-gallon bucket, when you put the sawdust on top, the toilet paper was creating way too many air pockets and it smelled bad. Like you could still smell the poop. And so, but when we put the toilet paper instead into this separate trash can, then the poop and the sawdust don't smell bad. And then we have it double lined. Like I said, the double liner is just as a safeguard. We usually don't have to deal with the second one, but then you can just, when you get to, this is the part that felt really sketchy and the worst thing about, like this was one of the hardest adjustments for me, was like, literally, now what do you do with a bag of poop? And I saw that other people were writing about this online, how they got rid of it. And so I just copied it and I was like, is this illegal? I don't know. Like, it felt sketchy. But people were just like taking bags of poop and sneaking them in, not sneaking, I mean, whatever. They just put them in public trash cans. So like that's a big thing we'll do at a gas station, is empty all of our trash bags. We have one trash can in the kitchen, the one that holds our toilet paper and the one that holds our poop. And then we have one for Indy's litter box, a little cat litter bag. So those are the trash cans in here. And we just have to put them in public trash cans, which I thought, oh no, that's so crazy. But then people did make the point, like, baby diapers go in public trash cans, and older folks who are wearing diapers, that goes into public trash cans. So dog poop, that goes into public trash cans. So it's probably a more common thing in a trash can than you would expect. But also it did feel, especially like at a gas station, to like unload all this trash. I sometimes will like take it to different trash cans within the same gas station. Just like, it practically, sometimes they're too full to fit all of the things, but then also it just like trying to spread it around. Yeah, and then the pee jug is a gallon, which we have found we have to empty about once a day, and sometimes we overflow it, and that's really sad. We actually overflowed it just last night because we didn't, we were like watching a TV show and one of us got up to pee, and then the next person was like, I should check the pee jug level, and then I was like, no, we overflowed it. And so we're on this BLM land, so we were able to just go like scatter the pee jug here, and it's not a big deal when we're on public land. When we're at campgrounds, we can take the jug, or at gas stations, you can put the lid on the jug, and I put it in like a canvas little Trader Joe's bag and walk in pretending like, oh, who knows what's in this bag, and then I dump the pee into the toilet there. We try to be respectful wherever we are, because dumping pee doesn't feel like, I don't think it's bad for the environment, and the plants don't mind it, especially because we're scattering it. But I don't think people like imagining us scattering pee on like their property. So we try to be kind about that.
I did want to say one other thing about like the situation on like BLM land. And I think that, so like, for example, there's some people where we are now and they're in tents. And so they're just doing everything, just, on
they don't
the
even have
ground
a pee jug
somewhere. And so I think on spaces like this, it feels like, we're I don't know. It just depends. So yeah, I don't know. So sometimes it can feel like maybe we should compare it to like what like a lower tech version of ourselves would be doing.
This is kind of a similar question, but could you talk about any ways in which anything about this trip made you rethink certain things that maybe in the past you might have taken for granted? Not necessarily through any fault of your own, but just because our culture takes it for granted.
So, yeah, I do recall when we were in Los Angeles, that definitely a big city. And the bus we had a number of challenges with the bus in Los Angeles. But yeah, the amount of showers that we take is significantly fewer than the amount that we did when we lived in a house.
And we do technically have a spot for a shower. We have a shower pan.
We actually have water that will go into the shower pan. But if it goes into the shower pan, it goes directly from there onto the floor, because the shower pan doesn't have a drain.
There's no drain.
Yeah, no drain on it.
And also no hot water. But something to think about is like, even the fanciest RVs, the fanciest RVs don't do a lot of boondocking where you just like hang out in a field like we are. But so they would hook up at a campsite, and often these campsites can be pretty expensive where the places that they're going are. But they would hook up to water and be able to take a shower and not worry about it. But we have like
100 gallons of water.
Of water.
And we want that to last as long as it can.
So we are usually pretty conservative with water use. And even if we did have a shower on board here, we probably would still be showering very infrequently. And when we did, it would be like quick rinses. So that's, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I haven't thought too much about the like, do I smell bad super recently? Because we haven't been spending much time in cities since when we went to Los Angeles. When we talked to you, we realized, you know what? Maybe we shouldn't be spending so much time in cities. So we've been more in the national park, state park, federal land sort of stuff recently in like the weeks between, and it's felt a lot better of a fit. But yeah, when we do go somewhere, I do.
I tell Noah when he smells bad. He sometimes does smell bad, and I say, you got to go use a washcloth right now, man.
Yeah. Gotta check. It's hard to know.
It's hard to know, but also I think this is maybe a good time for me to tell the story that I told when we were hanging out IRL about. So when we were in Fort Collins, there was I was just like out bebopping around town. I think I probably got a snack and was like just people watching or whatever. And I was sitting by one of those splash pads, you know, like kids can play like and run through the little fountains that like come up out of the ground at different speeds and stuff, and it's like fun. I was sitting looking at a splash pad, and this guy started washing his hair in the splash pad. It was a kind of overcast day. Not a lot of people were really hanging out by the splash pad. And so I think it felt like to him private enough that made sense to do there. And in the past, I probably would have felt some combination of like sorry for him and maybe a little even frightened of him because I just like couldn't relate to that at all. And then when but because I was living in a bus and I knew how hard showers to come by, and the way we were getting showers was by either we took so many showers at our friend's house, and felt really grateful for that. But then when we weren't taking showers at our friend's house for that like month and a half we were there, we were paying for a medium expensive rock climbing gym membership to be able to get showers there. And for a while, the showers at the rock climbing gym, their hot water heater broke. And so we were taking cold showers at the rock climbing gym. So anyway, when I saw this guy using the splash pad, I just like had so much more empathy for him. And instead of feeling like scared or sorry for him, I just thought like, man, that's pretty ingenious. Like, it's great work, bro. Like, good hack. And I don't think I felt brave or desperate enough to use a splash pad. And like that stuff is treated with chlorine, and I would be trying not to have that in my hair a bunch. But like the idea, if I saw someone in a river scrubbing, we don't use soap when we jump in rivers and lakes. We just rinse off in there. But like, I think in the past, if I saw someone who looked like they were really actually trying to get clean in a river, I would have felt like, oh no. And now I'm like, props. Actually, like, I often feel cleaner from a river than I do from a real shower now. So that's cool. And then, yeah, I think that was sort of like the most clear example I have in my head of that rethinking you were talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was just going to say a take that I had early on in this in our bus trip, and I haven't thought about it since then, but I felt like after moving into the bus, our lives became in some ways a lot simpler and in other ways a lot more complicated. Because I think a lot of the complexity that goes into making a bathroom work and a shower work and a sink work and getting water to your house and taking wastewater away and having electricity in a house, all that complexity gets just abstracted away into utility services that you pay a fee for, and then you have it. You have electricity, you have internet, you have whatever else, heating, all these things that you just have like with like a typical standard, normal, I don't know, house. But yeah, so you would have these services just in a house. But then when we moved into the bus, we moved into this before we were done with a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
And so there's just a lot of stuff that we just couldn't take for granted anymore. We didn't have lights in our bedroom area.
Until recently.
Until very recently. We still don't have any heat, no hot water.
Well, we have heat if we build a fire in our little wood stove.
Wood stove heat. So there's like a lot of things are simpler. in that, like, literally this just is a bus and the stuff we put in it. It's not connected to anything outside of it. It's all contained. It's very small. It's about 180 square feet. And it's simpler also in the respect that we understand all of it for the most part because we built all of it. We did all this. And so we kind of know how it works. We had to make it all simple enough that we could know how it works. But it's more complicated in that we have to deal with the everyday, where does water come from? Do we have enough electricity?
Oh, no, yeah, it's raining.
Oh, no. Yeah.
What are we going to do about electricity?
Yeah. And, like Lauren talked about, like what we do with like pee.
Yeah. Like we haven't added an outlet to the bedroom area either yet. And so for this call, it seemed like the software we were using wanted to be plugged in for like optimal recording. And so Noah ran an extension cord for me so that we could sit on the bed where I thought it would be comfier. But yeah, there were no outlets where we were going to be. So yeah.
Yeah. And then it's also more complicated in that, or just another aspect of it is that everything is based off of this bus continuing to mechanically function.
Yeah.
Which we're
knocking on wood
right now, a few different varieties. But it's but because that's the thing.
Thank you. I think, did you just knock on wood too?
I just did. Because honestly, I said this to you before, but like I kind of do worry.
Well, I mean, there's been stuff. So like just recently, our fuel line was leaking, which we had a whole thing where we noticed it was leaking. It was at Labor Day weekend that we noticed that was happening. It was some holiday weekend.
It was at the blueberry fields.
Yeah, and we were trying to get somewhere that weekend, 3 days of like driving. We were hoping to do it, but then it seemed like we were northern coast of Oregon up into the southern coast of Washington State at the time. And it was just, like our whole plan doesn't work if this bus doesn't run. And we've been trying. We read a book, or my dad recommended a magazine article, I believe, one time about a guy who lived in like a 1960s, camper that he had, got. But anyways, the moral of the story was for him was you have to turn your own wrenches. You got to learn how to fix this stuff yourself. And you don't have to, but otherwise you just
spend a fortune.
You spend a lot of money and then you don't learn how it works.
An added component is that, like, in the movie NOMADLAND, she's in a van, and she does take it to a mechanic.
Oh, that's true.
Which mechanics that work on vans are pretty easy to come by. For us in the bus, it's a lot harder to find, like, truck mechanics. And so we have taken it to mechanics before, but it often requires, like, we'll either coordinate. We have CoachNet is like a kind of like AAA, but for RVs. And so we have like a CoachNet membership, and we have one time called them and said, like, can you just help us find someone near here who will work on it? Like, we think we can get the bus there. Noah literally zip tied something in the engine to keep it running to get it to the mechanic to help us with that. But other places, like when we were in Colorado, we had something go wrong, and we were near enough to Colorado Springs that we thought we would be able to get the bus there, but we called around to a bunch of different places, and some places said, oh yeah, we work on RVs, but we don't work on conversions, because, I mean, they didn't explicitly say why we don't work on conversions. Yeah, often we'll have to like find a spot like miles ahead of where we are right now. And we actually did this with my car too, just because sometimes they'll schedule like weeks or months out. And so my car needed to be looked at. And also we were having to register my car. Like the state of North Carolina was like, hey, your registration's up. And so we had to figure out how to do that like remotely. And one of the things we needed to do was to like get it inspected in another state. And so we had to schedule something weeks out, and my car was like kind of being weird, and we were like, I hope we can make it this 800 miles to Florence, Oregon to get my car worked on. And I was even talking to the guy on the phone like, hey, we're not near there right now, but we're heading there. Can we schedule something for this week? Like the week of X date to whatever other date. He said, your car is not going to make it up here, ma'am. Like, you're not going to make it. And I said, well, can we still schedule the appointment just in case we do make it? But it was just like, yeah. I don't even remember the question we were talking about.
We're talking about fixing our own stuff, which I just have to say also that we owe a lot of credit to our ability to be able to fix things in this bus to a person we met very early on in the bus conversion process, because I was calling around. We didn't have a license to drive the bus. The bus was still titled as a school bus when we bought it, and we did not have licenses to drive school buses. And we actually still, even after it's titled as a house car, which is what North Carolina labels RVs, we still don't have a license to do it because it's too heavy. Or we didn't at the time have the license to do it because it's too big of a vehicle. You need a separate license for that. So anyways, I was calling around for anyone who
We
might
do have the correct license now.
We do have the correct license now. But at the time, I was calling around to try to find anyone who was in approximately the region who could move this bus from the spot, one spot to another spot. And I ended up finding someone who worked at a bus garage, which I didn't know existed.
Like a school bus garage.
A school bus
for
garage.
Yancey County, North Carolina.
Because they have many school buses they have to maintain, so it makes sense. And so he ended up just offering a lot of help and advice. And when I say, I just punctured something outside the wheel and there's a lot of oil on the ground now, he says, it's not too bad. And so that's been really...
And actually, when Noah got the parts and we fixed the fuel lines just recently over Labor Day weekend,
which we fixed, I'm sorry, from a boat store. It was because we couldn't find any diesel mechanics, and all the car mechanics were like, we can't make a hose that big. But then we were on the coast, and so there was a big marine supply store, and they said, yeah, we can make you a hose. So that was real nice. They got us some hose.
But our bus wouldn't start. We replaced the fuel lines and we let it run, and we were like, cool, we think it's working, and then it died. It stopped running, and we were like, we don't know what we're doing. And so Noah called this guy who's been so kind and helpful, and he said something like, you're gonna have to crank on that. He said, just crank it, and you can hold it for a good 20-30 seconds. You'll think, oh, that thing's about to blow, but it won't. And so he gave us the confidence to really try some things that would have felt pretty scary. We just were afraid of breaking it more.
Yeah.
But he told us not. You're all right.
So, listening to this stuff and the sheer complexity of the technical issues that come up and the challenges and the constant troubleshooting.
And we can't ship things anywhere either.
Right, that too. The logistics. Yeah. Was there ever a point when you thought, okay, this was an interesting idea, but I don't know if we can go on, or maybe it's not too late to turn around and go back home, or even if it is too late, let's just go home. Whatever. You're just this is getting a bit much.
Mm-hmm. A number of occasions, yeah.
Yeah, I can think of one specifically.
Tell me about it.
It's Fort Collins.
Okay.
I don't.
Tell the story.
Was this when our solar panels came off the roof?
Oh, no, I don't think. I think we considered the option when our solar panels flew off the roof.
Yeah.
You should briefly tell that story, because now everyone's going to think we're driving down the road and the solar panels
We were not
off.
driving down the road when the solar panels came off. We were parked. We were somewhere very stationary, and... Oh, yeah, so we didn't have internet set up in a very consistent way when we started this. We have both satellite internet and we have hotspot internet. We have a dedicated hotspot device that we bought from Verizon that has its own plan, but it has, a certain amount of gigabytes that we can use per month on it.
And a Wii Boost to strengthen that connection.
And we have a Wii Boost to strengthen the signal from the cell towers. And so we have all of this to try to maintain connectivity so I can join meetings from wherever we are. And so far, knocking on wood, but not as much this time. It's more important than the bus runs. If I'm going to use my doxy, it's for the bus to keep running. But so far, the signal has been just fine wherever we're at. With one of those two systems. Anyways, we didn't have those set up when we moved into the bus. We had both of them physically, the devices, but we didn't have them connected, mounted in any way, hooked up in any sort of permanent way. So I had to, whatever. I wanted to mount them on the roof. And to mount them on the roof, I wanted to mount them to the same rail system that the solar panels are mounted to. And so to do that, I wanted to get some of the same connectors that I could clamp stuff to these rails as the solar panels use. So I unscrewed a couple of the solar panel connectors, the solar panels are quite heavy. They're like 50 pounds. They sit up there. I took those connectors off. I went to a store to buy some more ones. And I'm not going to lie, more than one day went by. And then...
Before we put the connector...
Before I put them... Well, yeah, more than one day went by. Maybe like 1 or 2 days. But then a big gust of wind came and just chucked 2 of the solar panels fully off the roof.
And broke them. Beyond
Yeah,
repair.
beyond repair.
And also landed on one of our favorite camp chairs.
Also
we
true.
had 2 camp chairs and one of them got smashed.
It was a big gust of wind. Very big gust of wind came and just took the panels right off the roof. I mean, it rattled them around first. We were inside. We're like, what is going on out there? And then it took them off the roof, and they just they sailed a few feet. Anyways, that was really sad.
Really sad, really scary. We talked about turning back then.
Talked about that then.
We talked about turning back even when we just first got to Fort Collins, because we had just had like immediately, like Noah described, oil on the ground from our hubcap like had broken, and that was in southern Colorado where it was snowing and really muddy, and I was driving like hours to try to get the spare parts to be able to fix this. And when we first got to Fort Collins, we were originally planning to just like keep on trucking through, but the reason we stayed so long is that Noah actually had like a lot of work meetings coming up that were requiring flying, which was pretty rare for his work in the past. But right then, like as we were moving into the bus, they had needed him to fly a bunch. And so but we were trying to like figure out how to drive and schedule his flights from these other cities, but we didn't have like we were still trying to like actively do construction on the bus constantly. There was so much like just like that needed to be done, and it's hard to find places to like do the construction sometimes, because anywhere that's big enough to have like a really comprehensive, well-stocked hardware store often is a city. And as we've described, cities are hard to do bus stuff, like just live a bus life. But then if you're kind of in the middle of nowhere where it's more okay to do this stuff, you're going to have to drive either really far to find the parts you need, or you just probably won't have the parts you need to work on it. So it kind of like presents a challenge there. So we talked about turning back just because like the logistics were looking really hard and exhausting. And then the one other time I think we talked about turning back was in California, right after we actually visited you.
It was that bad, huh?
Well, it was, we were like, that was a terrible time visiting our friends. It was actually because of the ants that we had. There were just so many ants.
Did we really consider leaving because of the ants?
I don't think we considered leaving, but it was like, okay.
That was the lowest low for me personally, was when we had so many ants.
Yeah.
That was in the movie too. No, the ants. I was like, oh, it's going to trigger the PTSD.
Mm-hmm. It was really bad, but I don't think we were going to turn back because of the ants, but the ants made us it was like a reckoning moment where we were like having a pretty bad time. It was really hot, actually, a lot of the places we were staying. It was like you could either had to be like right by the coast, which is medium hard to find places to stay, or in the mountains. But obviously like a lot of California is that Central Valley area where it's really hot. And so we like would wind up accidentally in the valley in like 100-degree heat with no AC. And it was around then we had the ants were still a big problem. It was really hot. And we were like, okay, what are our actual goals here? Like, what are we trying to do in the bus? Because right now we're having a bad time. Like, what's the vision here? And what is actually feasible? A lot of logistics were piling up, and frankly still are piled up. But we've decided a lot of the logistics can just wait. Like any other, we are pretty much like not doing more construction on the bus unless something actively breaks at this point. Whereas I think before we thought, oh yeah, we'll just like drive and work on it and like drive and work on it and that'll be sustainable. But that just hasn't been the case. So we really like had to decide what our goals were and kind of narrow the scope of what we thought this was going to be. We had talked about really wanting to surf a bunch, and then the logistics of that were just feeling really hard, especially when showers are hard to find and you're covered in sand in a small space, and then you're like, well, now what? You know?
We had talked about doing a really big social dance era.
West Coast Swing
specifically, doing a whole bunch of social dancing, but that is near a big city, which we've talked about, and then also that just definitely involves just like getting really sweaty all the time and then not having a good place to
and being around people where you really don't want to be stinky. So, yeah, I think we just decided, you know what, we thought it was going to be a surfing era. We thought it was going to be a West Coast swing dancing era. Instead, what it is a bus era.
Yeah.
And kind of like coming to terms with that and deciding we were just going to have the best time we can have doing this thing instead of trying to incorporate all these other like big goals into it.
Yeah, that's probably wise. And that reminds me actually that I forgot to ask a question I meant to earlier, which was after you built the bus, you could have just lived on it in the same town. Why did you choose? Because Lauren, you mentioned like during the ant crisis, you were like, okay, like why are we doing this? It's still worth it. Like, why did you choose in the first place to go on this cross country trip?
Good question.
I'll bring up a point from earlier is we didn't really know what we were getting into. Is perhaps one of the factors. No, I think that we really wanted motivation to
finish it,
to be done. And so to be done would mean that we could drive around the country. And so I think that we really wanted to feel like we were doing a big thing. We spent all this time, building the bus, and now this bus has wheels. Let's drive it. I think is where I was coming from, and I also wanted to see these places. I was really stoked about the different eras we could do. The West Coast is a great place for surfing and West Coast swing dancing.
We were gonna do a snowboarding era. We're gonna do it. Yeah, it would just unlock all these ways to do these fun things we wanted to do.
Thought it was going to really unlock this,
while keeping our jobs.
Yeah, we thought that was going to be no problem.
Talk about giving ourselves a deadline.
Yeah, and then also, okay, so we got this timeline, 2023.
Summer of 2023.
We bought it on a website called govdeals.com, where government entities, public entities, will auction off their stuff, such as school buses. So we bought this from Asheville City Schools.
A fun fact, Noah sometimes still checks those sites, and Noah's like, Lauren, should I bid $20 to get 300 iPads, old iPads? And I'm like, no.
Yeah, or what about 5 pretty good condition file cabinets? So there's a lot of good stuff on there if you're interested. But we bought a school bus on there.
And you bought some weird tables that we did not use.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I did buy some tables. They were only $5. But anyways, it's hard to pass up on the deals you can get. So we got this school bus
for $6,000-ish.
Yep, $6,000. It's 1995 international school bus. It's it had 130 something thousand miles when we bought it. And so we had this bus in 2023. We still had this bus a year later, in 2024.
We thought we were going to finish it
we were going to finish it in 9 months. That's what we said originally.
But then we decided to do a ballet.
Yeah.
And then we decided also to plan a wedding and get married. Yep. And then we also survived a hurricane.
Ooh, and then also I got really into whitewater paddleboarding, which took up all my weekends. And so didn't really work on the bus that much. But then a year passed, and we still, we had done a lot to the bus, but we still had a lot to do. And it was Thanksgiving, and we were like, are we ever going to finish this?
We're never going to
finish. What are we going to do? What's our plan? We said we didn't want to rent anymore, but turns out we've actually been renting the whole time since we've done this. Are we ever going to be able to move into this? What are we really going to do? And so we set a deadline for ourselves, which was we're going to rent a place in Taos, New Mexico. And we better be there by the time the rental starts.
Like an Airbnb, short-term rental situation.
Short-term rental. We said we're not going to worry about trying to stay in the bus for our snowboard era of this.
Because that would require, winterproofing, making sure our gray water tank wasn't going to freeze, really feeling extra confident that we could stay warm enough. All that felt too stressful.
So we said we're not going to worry about that, but we do need the bus to be in good enough condition to get us to Taos, New Mexico by the time that this starts. And we gave ourselves about 3 months from there, 2 months, 2 or 3 months.
The beginning of February is when the Airbnb started.
And it was ridiculous. We worked, I was up until about 2 a.m. every day.
Both of us.
Doing stuff.
And then working full-time jobs. We even, I think, both took a week of PTO in order to just hammer away at the bus for a whole week. We were up extremely late trying to get it done.
For about 2 months, yeah. And it was...
I think it was probably at least midnight when we finally, Noah built the bed frame in the back, and we were like, we have this mattress that's been sitting in this house that we've been renting for a while. Why don't we, in the deep, deep snow, we were like snowed in at this place. And so we couldn't go get new parts and stuff while we were trying to finish the bus because we couldn't get down the snowy mountain. And so we brought the mattress, we slid it down the hill on a tarp, kind of like a sled. and then we brought it in at like 1 a.m. and we put the mattress on the bed, and it almost didn't fit through this small space that we have, but we tacoed it such that it did fit through. And then we had a mattress in here, and that was probably for me the biggest high of like working on the bus, was like just for that, the bus construction. Putting the mattress in here felt like a big deal. So 1 a.m. Big deal.
So it just like we set a deadline. We wanted to do something, and it felt like we were just we talked about, we like jumping through hoops.
I think we even had some friends who were kind of naysayers. They didn't believe it was gonna be we were gonna finish it.
So I don't think the bus is
never gonna happen. And I was like, that was fuel for me.
We'll show you. Yeah. We wanted an adventure, I think.
Yeah.
And we just didn't know if we wanted to feel like we knew where home was going to be. And I think we felt like if we didn't drive around the West Coast a little bit and like check out the cool, like Washington and Oregon and California, where like we hear so much about these places, like if we didn't go look, I think we would have like more of a what if than I think we feel now.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting too. Speaking of the West Coast, and we have just a few more questions. Thank you so much for your endurance. Speaking of the West Coast, there was an article in the Daily Beast a few years ago by this journalist who took a cross-country trip throughout the western U.S. I don't think it was the whole country. But obviously this depends on like where you go. But for him and the places that he went, he said it reminded him of how ecologically unsustainable the historical development of the West was in a lot of ways, and how there were things he saw during the trip that really brought home for him the severity of the eco-climate crisis and related issues like water scarcity. And I was just curious if there was anything like at any point of the trip, not necessarily the West, that kind of underlined for you like, oh, right, because, you know, you're so occupied with the daily logistics and challenges that come up, you might sort of like briefly forget about it, like, oh yeah, collapse. Or like a dystopian thing, Lauren, that you mentioned in Malibu with like seeing the devastation of the wildfires contrasted with the areas of opulence, and that just felt so dystopian, right? Does anything like that?
I think I personally feel a lot better when we're in an area that feels wet with water.
Feels like safer.
Feels a bit safer. Yeah, especially when we have to be pretty concerned with like where the water comes from.
Just like getting water on the butt, you know.
Just getting water. You just got to get it. You know, for us, even in, you know, desert regions, there are places that have hydrants that you can fill up water from. But it definitely brings to the forefront of the mind, like, where's this water coming from? You know, is it sustainable? Are we going to be able to get it? I don't think there's really a concern at this time that like we wouldn't be able to like find water to put in here, but in drier areas, like I do find myself just a bit more aware of that.
Yeah, I think I think about the climate crisis and collapse a lot. It's not often that I like forget about it, you know. I think everything from like seeing, like, definitely I think I even cried a little bit on my way to visit you in like when we did that Santa Monica Pier Day, because it was definitely like the contrast of you said it really well, just the contrast of the devastation of the forest fire versus the opulence and like just super dystopian feeling. What do you want to say?
No, sorry. Just related to that, we also visited San Francisco. And that was a very different place than any of the other places we'd been, in that it felt like just the stuff you see on the billboards.
Oh, yeah.
Was just, it's a completely different bubble than anywhere else that we've been, as far as I can tell. Like, you know, just advertisements for like, you got to be using this credit card for your startup company.
And AI you can trust.
AI you can trust, that sort of stuff. Like, just hugely, like,
Wow.
how, like, all of these things that I thought were kind of jokes, but it was like, that was the whole life
The
of,
culture.
that was the culture, yeah, around, at least, you know, some of these areas of San Francisco, which, yeah, and then, like, contrast that to, you know, where we've been, like, middle of nowhere, Montana. They are not thinking about that stuff at all.
Yeah. I also think we were talking, like, we were visiting friends in Seattle, and at one point we kind of met our friend's friend, like, there a sort of wider circle of friends gathered, and we were at, like, a brewery, and I somehow wound up sitting next to these two random people I had never met before, and I started talking to them about, like, just kind of, like, started out as small talk, like, what do you do as a job, and, like, what do you enjoy doing, and whatever, just, like, normal conversations like that. And it turned out they were both, like, software developers who did AI related development for big name companies. I don't remember even the companies. They said it could have been as big as Amazon though. And I obviously had a lot of questions about that, especially from a collapse perspective. And I also had a feeling that they had a really different perspective than I did. And so I was trying to not ask super leading questions and was just trying to understand, like, kind of how they think about all this. But at the end, I kind of, like, hard turned the conversation into, like, questions about what their utopian visions were. Like, what do they hope the world turns into? And, like, what's a best case scenario for these technologies they're working on right now? And one of them said that, like, their utopian vision was basically the, like, humans merge with the machine cyborg vision. And the other one said he even acknowledged it was a little bit matrixy, but he said, okay, Daniel, you're going to think this is so nuts. He said, we live on a finite planet. And I was like, yeah. And then he said, we can't expand infinitely on a finite planet. So what are we going to do? Like, how best to use these resources? And then he said, we should just automate everything, automate pleasure, basically put humans in pods, like hedonist machines, because then you don't have to actually fly to go visit to see a wild animal. You can just put on your headset and see the wild animal. Like, his vision was like hedonist machines. Yeah, that was our way to best use the resources, like burn the actual planet. He didn't say that, but it was to him a way of, like, minimizing the resources we need to use. He was saying automate our lives, not even like fully, like, virtual reality. Our lives was his utopian vision. And that's obviously just, like, so different from the world that I live in and what I think is possible and what I desire. Like, those to me sound actually very dystopian. Both of those visions sound extremely dystopian to me, and just, like, completely undesirable. I would way rather live in a bus with no shower than live in either of those worlds. So, yeah.
That just goes to show that one person's utopia is another person's dystopia and vice versa. And it's really interesting with San Francisco, like, everyone who visits it and comments on it, I kind of always make a point of saying that city has changed so much in just a few decades, like, unbelievably a lot. It really did used to be the city of, like, in the 60s, like that one song about if you're going to San Francisco, be sure to put flowers in your hair by Scott McKenzie or whatever his name was. Yeah, it really was a city like that. And then with the coming in the tech industry and a lot of the gentrification, it has changed so much. And now the kind of things that people remark on are, like those billboards that you saw and things like that. But this next question is the reverse of the previous one. So was there anything you saw or experienced that made you think, like, okay, yes, we have a lot of urgent crises before us, but also I see this thing here reminding me that people are finding various ways to be creative, resilient, or they're coming together in community or working on cool things together, or just anything like that. It doesn't have to be necessarily collapse related. Just any kind of, like, signals of hope, for example, that we look for on Urgent Optimists. And, it could be related to, like, you're an artist, so it could be related to the arts. So, like, something that I think of, speaking of the arts, is like just how related that actually is potentially to collapse in terms of giving people frameworks of meaning and hope. Like there's a show and a book called Station 11, where after a major pandemic kills off so much of the world, there's a group of traveling actors performing Shakespeare, and they provide people with meaning and comfort and joy, so just things like that, anything at all.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like a signal of hope so much as like a framework of hope. But I have lately been watching a lot of Dropout TV, which is just, we actually, when we were in LA, went to see a Upright Citizens Brigade, and people call it UCB, which is a like improv theater troupe type situation. And it was just really, really fun. And for me, like every time I watch Dropout TV, I'm like, these are my people. Like these improv, like I want to be their friends. Like they're so creative, like the resourcefulness and the creativity and the fun that they have with just their imaginations. They're not having to like go like get dropped out of airplanes so they can parachute down to have a good time. They're like just using words. And like one of my favorite shows right now is D20, where Dimension 20, where you literally are just watching these like actors and comedians playing Dungeons and Dragons, which is extremely nerdy, but like I have a great time with it. And actually, like it feels like a lot of threads are coming together right now, where I'm feeling really excited about an idea that I have, which was inspired by all these different things. The Dropout TV being one, and just like improv in general. Also, I'm a dancer, have always been a dancer, and like have been missing that a lot. And so when we get back to North Carolina, we're going to be in the Nutcracker again, which will be fun. And I was trying to figure out what is it that makes helpful art in collapse versus what is distraction art in collapse. And I think helpful is different to different people. But for me, I was realizing, I think art that feels helpful to me is stuff that's telling new stories, new kinds of stories, which is almost like a buzzwordy type thing to say, but like to really break down, like a common critique I hear of like Marvel movies, which I am not a Marvel buff at all. I've watched a few and like am entertained enough by them, but the superhero always saves the day and then you go back to the status quo, and that's the superhero. And often the villain is asking really like more interesting moral questions about like, what I mean, as I said, I'm not a Marvel buff, but they're posing interesting sort of like moral questions about how we're doing things and what we're doing, but the superhero is who wins and who you're kind of rooting for. And so that's, to me, not like an extremely helpful story because it's not pushing us to imagine different futures. And so something I'm feeling excited about is there's Bread and Puppet Circus. People have Bread and Puppet, is it called Circus at the end? They make puppets and do like cool puppet shows up in Vermont. They're pretty famous in like collapsey world. So anyway, I'm pulling all these things together. I'm really like in the mood to create, when I get back to North Carolina, start building some infrastructure to create an improv troupe of dancers and actors and musicians to tell stories of hope from an apocalyptic future, to just try to help start like telling new stories and ideas in a way that like so Rob Hopkins talks a lot about like sort of like futurism, where you gotta imagine hopeful things, and this, it's too much foresight. I'm really like starting to stumble over my own words because it's all so melded together right now, but that's really what it has felt like for me, is just like driving around in the bus and every little piece of seeing someone wash their hair in the splash pad and looking at the dystopian reality of like Malibu and looking at, just everything I see feels like it's converging right now into this, like, I think we have to use art to tell these new stories. And that feels like something I might actually be good at, because it doesn't do any good to just like shove yourself into a role that you're not good at. Like building the bus, Noah did a lot of the like head chefing of electricity and water systems and stuff. He has a background in engineering, and my role was a lot more of like, okay, I'm not as good as construction as Noah is, but I can like learn to build some stuff, and that's something I can be okay at. And so it's like I'm just trying to really figure out what roles are helpful to inhabit for different people. Like different people have different strengths, and how do you bring those to the table in creative ways in apocalyptic times, to bring your gifts to the table and like figure out what your gifts even are. And anyway, that was kind of a more rambly
No, it was very coherent for me. It makes perfect sense to me how all those little different things that you see or saw during the trip and the little different thoughts that it inspires you to have lead to this bigger picture that you're talking about and fertilize these creative ideas. It makes absolute sense to me. And also, yes, people can serve important and useful roles doing what they're good at and what they are naturally interested in. There doesn't have to be like this limited set of roles that are considered quote unquote the important stuff and everything else doesn't matter. Like, no, like there's a
Yeah.
way to serve and help using what you're good at and are interested in. So that was a great point as well.
One other very small thing is I think I've just on this trip gotten into much closer proximity with poverty than I ever have before. I've mostly grew up in like an extremely middle class situation, even though it was in a really rural town. But a lot of the RV parks we're staying at, like sometimes, and even on this BLM land, I would imagine, there's some level of poverty that people are experiencing. And since that wasn't something I was extremely close to in the past, I think now it's in some ways it's not a signal of hope. Like, I know by definition a signal is something that's like surprising and a little on the edge, and there are like definitions around what a signal of hope really is. But for me, like watching people really make poverty work and okay, and like in all these different settings, whether it's in a city in Fort Collins or in these rural like RV parks where they're like making it happen and living what seem like good, happy, normal lives. It just makes me feel like people are resourceful and we're going to keep having fun even when things are hard. We had fun during the hurricane. We were like playing cards by candlelight with my aunt. That was fun. We're going to make it happen.
Yeah, for sure. So as we approach the end of our interview, let's talk about the importance of building parallel structures. Lauren, you and I have talked about this before a bit. Would you like to share any thoughts about the intentional community you're envisioning and why it has become part of your life plans?
So I think, okay, sure. I'll definitely talk about, I'm going to just riff on like intentional communities in general. I think my thoughts have shifted slightly from the time we last talked, but not dramatically. So my friend Nissa, who you also know through otherwise, she has land up in Vermont that she envisions turning into an intentional community. And I've helped her write some like vision documents and some governance documents and stuff like that to try to create some infrastructure for it. But yeah, I think what I'm interested in is like the pooling of resources to keep each other like safe and out of debt, essentially. That's like and while at the same time, so pooling resources to keep each other safe and out of debt, while at the same time allowing everyone to work as little as possible, really, unless you like super love your job. And then like, I'm not trying to tell you to not work as much, but I think a lot of people don't love their job and think what they do is kind of a waste of time, or they don't like it, or maybe they like it okay, but they just wish they could do less of it. And so, yeah, I'm kind of like interested in trying to get all those things together because I think that figuring out different structures and being really creative about how we organize our lives, like there are books that touch on this way more thoroughly than I can do right now, but the nuclear family was sort of like intentionally designed as a tool of capitalism because it creates, it's a big enough unit that it can be quote unquote like self-sufficient. Theoretically, you could have one person work, the other person kind of do the care work that is often not compensated, which is super unjust because without the care work, you couldn't keep people fed to like go to the normal work, the paid work, the capitalist work. And that's by design, of course. Capitalism wouldn't work if people weren't doing this unpaid work because you couldn't afford to keep it all running, or it would cut deeply into profit margins and make it a lot less worth it. So the nuclear family is designed to be just self-sufficient enough, but also dependent enough on all these other companies and organizations. And wow, our kitty is having a fun time meowing and running around. It also, at the very same time, makes you sort of like dependent on the economy doing well. You want to be able to keep your job. You want to be able to buy the food from the companies that are, it sort of like locks you into capitalism. Nuclear family structures do.
And debt.
And debt. One book that I know touches on this, it's not like the main point of the book, but like discussed in it, if people are interested to learn more, is Work Won't Love You Back by Sarah Jaffe. It's super good. It's a little bit dense, but I listened to it as an audiobook while I was like doing physical therapy for a while, and I loved it. So super good one to just get like intros into this. I think some of Kristen Godsey's work, she has some podcasts. She's been on a bunch of different podcasts, so you can look up Kristen Godsey as well. But yeah, I think it's about saying no to ways of structuring our lives that lock us into systems that are exploitative, harmful, oppressive, whatever we want to call it there. And I think intentional community is one way of doing that. I don't think it has to be the only way or the only thing you're doing or the thing that you do. But something I struggle with within that is sort of like where the rubber hits the road around like, I was just talking to someone in North Carolina about this actually, like, do you find the people then build the vision, or have the vision then find the people, or is it some combination? And there are some books about it. I think it's called like Living Together or Living Well Together by Diana Christian Leaf. So, oh man, I'll have to send you the name of some of these to put in the show notes or something. But yeah, there are books that kind of like help you do this where the rubber hits the road. But then there's also just like, does it make more sense to just join an intentional community that already exists, even if it doesn't share the exact same values or vision that I do? Maybe joining an intentional community to say like, secure land or housing at a more affordable rate while like collectively pooling money for taxes or something like that might create more space in my life to be able to say, do the like improv troupe that I'm thinking about, or I have this vision for a community space where it's like, I wanted to, right after the hurricane, I wanted to run some free improv classes as a way to kind of help people like emotionally process what had happened, because when you laugh, you can more easily access those vulnerable parts of yourself that actually also need to cry and grieve. So I wanted to host free improv classes, and the reason I didn't is that I couldn't find a free space to gather people. The only place I could think to do it would be like outside, and it was winter and too cold for that to reasonably work, or I would have had to pay to rent some space, and then like I either have to do it out of pocket or charge admission, and I didn't want to do either of those things. And so yeah, where does that leave us? It's the commons. And that's actually something that I kind of thought would come up but didn't, is I'm driving around the country in a school bus, and we just figured out this past month we spent a little over $1,000 in like places to park and rent, like basically rent a little over $1,000, which is I guess like cheap rent for a lot of places, but it's still a lot when you're considering we're living in a vehicle. And so just like the commons being enclosed, like in general, like that's something that's come up a lot.
And then it came out to be about $2,000 once you added diesel to that.
Diesel cost.
Yeah, and there are so many like comments and questions and points that I'm leaving aside just in the interest of time, but that is something that I was thinking about asking, in the sense that for people who maybe, aren't living in their vehicles but are considering it, I think a harsh reality many of them discover later is that sure, you might save some money, and sure, it might not be as expensive as renting an apartment or paying mortgage, but you probably won't save as much as you might be thinking, just because of all those reasons and many other reasons that we haven't even gone into.
Yeah,
totally. And I think it depends to some. I think that that's exactly the right assessment there. I do think if we were willing to hang out like in the Dakotas and Utah and sort of like the kind of flatter areas of the Mountain West, we could probably find a lot more BLM land to just go like park on and hang out. But
if we were willing to stay a place like that where we could have free land for longer periods of time, then I think that wouldn't be so bad. Or if we like stayed in one area for a longer time, and we were able to like get to know the places that we could go.
Trade like some farm work for free, like parking.
Maybe. But yeah, or just like get to know the BLM, like, because, right now we're sort of we show up, and if we could find something quickly that night that we're showing up that we can drive into when it's dark, then that's where we'll go. And if we can't find that, then we'll have to go pay someone to stay with them. So yeah, but it is expensive. And when we're back in North Carolina, there's like not BLM land on the East Coast. So we will have to find some sort of paid land, most likely, to stay on, which is, again, rent.
Yeah. Yeah.
So this is an optional question, but I've asked a lot of questions, but now just I wanted to give you an opportunity. If there was anything you were wanting to say or talk about that didn't come up yet, just go for it.
Just one small note on the comments. Like I was just saying, if we were willing to stay in some areas of the mountain, of the like flatter parts of the West, we could maybe find more free parking, and that's true. But also there's this like recent thing of like a bunch of BLM land is getting sold to private property owners, often I think in parcels that are far too many. Like the acreage is way too big for like a normal person to reasonably be able to afford it, I think, in most situations. So it's just going to get this publicly owned land right now is just going to get carved up and handed off to rich people, is what seems like is happening. And I'm not like super read into it, but it's just like a very relevant example of enclosure like continuing to happen, and it impacts this exact like group of people who live nomadically in cars.
To add to that, just the third spaces in general. We've been talking about that one. But yeah, I've become a lot more appreciative of these spaces that exist outside of, what's third space? It's outside of the home and outside of work.
Yeah.
That's the third. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, and in the bus, home and work are the same place. Work from home, home and work are the same place. But this is, this is our space. But then outside of that, sometimes it can feel really small. If we're at like at a campground where it feels like outside of the bus isn't really somewhere I want to be either, because I don't know, like, you're packed in really tightly and so you really don't have much space, or, whatever the reason is, then yeah, it makes me wish that there were places that I could just go to have, space somewhere else. So the national parks have been really good for that sort of thing. You can get outside, but it just mostly it's made me realize how there are not many of those, at least not many that I know of in these like you go to a new city and you're like, I would like to go spend some time in a third space, and it's mostly just cost based. Just you
extremely cost based.
You got to pay for any other space you want to be in.
Yeah.
Finally, is there anything you'd like to plug? Like, for example, any social media accounts, perhaps? Like, where can people find you? Or do you even want to be found? Which, given the way things are going in the U.S. right now, I can definitely understand not wanting to be found.
We had an Instagram account for a minute. I'm getting ready to delete it. I am super not into providing content for big companies that want to steal people's data and advertise to them. So we're not on social media right now. If you're a close friend of ours, you can reach out to us over text or something and we'll give you a link to our Signal group. But if you're not, then I hope you enjoyed this podcast. Please don't try to find us. If we ever get a Mastodon account, we'll let you know.
Like, I had thought about like making like I don't know, like a website at some point, but I just don't really want to. I don't know, like, I felt like that was a good thing to do.
Yeah, I think I'm just not willing to put emotional energy into curating this content. Like, I have too many other ideas and things that I'm excited about, too many different projects, and kind of like making the bus. There's a lot of people doing what we're doing and making content for it. And they're not collapse people necessarily, but I think anyone who is collapse aware can connect the dots for themselves there. And then I will just say, I mentioned the organization Otherwise. That's of course like key to how I like really deepened my connection with the pop mythologist here. I've deepened friendships through like conversations I've been able to have through Otherwise. They talk about interesting things for sure, and put out really interesting content and curate resources. They do a lot of like cool things for people who are in the mood to think more, talk more, and make new friends who are interested in talking about collapse. Yeah, I've definitely like visited someone else. There was even someone else in California we visited who I met fully through it otherwise. And yeah, that had just been a digital friendship, but it turned into a real life friendship when we got to go meet her in real life. So yeah, otherwise is a really, really, I think, good resource for people, especially who feel a little bit isolated in their lives around collapse and don't have a lot of people to talk to about it. I think for me, it was a really nourishing place. So now when I have some collapse thought come into my mind, I have a whole network of people I can reach out to. I would love to give you a link to Otherwise's website because it's hard to find if you just search like in a search engine. So really good people over there if you are interested. But yeah, that's all.
Okay, very good. So, Lauren and Noah, thank you so much for joining me on this podcast today. It's been a very illuminating and compelling conversation. And yeah, super good luck on the rest of the remaining portion of your journey. Hopefully no big mishaps, hopefully, fingers crossed, and you'll make it home without any incident. And I look forward to staying in touch with you guys.
Thank you.
Thank
It
you
was
very
really
much.
fun to thanks for letting us chatter for
Yes,
so long
thank you
and
for
process
listening.
all this.
Absolutely. And so for the folks listening, this has been Strange Days, Here We Come. I've been your host, the Pop Mythologist, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Hi, Daniel. Thanks again for chatting today. It was really fun. I just wanted to tell you, so we just went on a walk around this land and we met a woman who was really interesting, invited us over to her campfire for a minute. And we chatted with her and definitely like a signal of hope. I mean, it's very much like within dystopia, but signal of hope within dystopia. She seems like she chose to live in a vehicle. She was renting, it sounds like, a 1-bedroom place for $1,600 a month, and that was just feeling like really expensive. And so she moved into her car, just a little normal car, not like a van or anything, in February, which she said was really, really rough in the winter because she didn't have a heater or anything in the winter in Montana. And so it was like her blankets she said the condensation is what really got her, where she would like be breathing in the car and the moisture in the air would just create a bunch of condensation and her blankets would freeze. So she said, anyway, that was really, really, really tough. But it seems like she has a relationship with the Forest Service here. So technically you're only allowed to camp, usually on federal lands, you're not allowed to camp longer than like 14 days is the typical rule. I think this spot might be 16 days. But anyway, she has a relationship with the Forest Service such that like as long as people are keeping a clean campsite, they can just live here. She says if they like have trash everywhere or they're like dealing drugs and stuff, then they'll evict them from this like public land. But she says she's the unofficial campground host of this public land where people are just fully living when they don't have other options. And so, yeah, I can't believe that I talked to her right after our conversation, but I just thought you would find it really interesting.